What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. So the GoPro 9 is finally here, and this year this is also a bit more expensive than what the GoPro 8 used to be. So this year you're gonna have to spend somewhere around $450 if you want the GoPro 9. Now, I've seen the GoPro 8 for around $300 on multiple occasions, so is it worth upgrading from the 8 to the 9 or is it worth getting the 8 over the 9? Well, that's what we're gonna find out in today's video. So I split this video in three sections. The first section we're gonna check out and see which camera has the better internal microphone. The second section will have to do the image stabilization, so we'll see which camera has better image stabilization. And the last section has to do the video quality, so we'll find out if the video quality is that much different between the 8 and the 9. And with that being said, I think we should start by checking out some sample recordings so we can see which camera has the better internal microphone. So let's check out those recordings and I'll be right back so we can talk about them. Alright, this is our first audio test between the GoPro Hero 9 Black and the GoPro Hero 8 Black. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and at this resolution both cameras are set on the boost level of image stabilization, and as you can probably see for yourself, I am walking. So this is how the internal microphones on these two action cameras would sound like under these conditions. For our second audio test, I am inside the car and I have all the windows closed, and I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with the GoPro 9 and the GoPro 8. So this is how the internal microphones on these two action cameras would sound like if you're somewhere where there is no other noise aside from your voice. I also wanted to show you how the internal microphone sounds if you have a bit more noise around you. So we have a bit more wind this time around. There is that water behind me, I'm not sure if you can see that. There is some traffic, so definitely way more noise around me. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second with the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. So yeah, this is how the internal microphone would sound under these conditions. Alright, and I am back. So after watching those recordings, I have to say that the sound from the 8 is pretty much identical to the sound from the 9. Could you tell any differences? I personally couldn't tell the difference between the 8 and the 9, so they do sound very similar. Now, I also have the media mod for the 8. I believe this was about $79. I haven't got the media mode for the 9 yet, but whenever I get that, I'm gonna do a different video so you can see if the media mod on the 9 will be different than the media mod on the 8. But for the internal microphones, personally, I believe that they sound the same. Next, we're gonna move on and check out some sample recordings so we can see which camera has better image stabilization. Now, there is a change for the GoPro 9. Now you can use the boost level of image stabilization for pretty much all resolutions. There are certain resolutions that the GoPro 8 cannot use that boost image stabilization. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back so we can talk about them. This is our first quick test for image stabilization between the GoPro Hero 8 and the GoPro Hero 9. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course at this resolution both devices, both cameras have the boost image stabilization available. And I have that one set, and as you can probably see for yourself, I am walking normally. So this is how the image stabilization would look like between the GoPro Hero 8 and the 9 if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. For our next test I am doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and I am on the bicycle. I'm gonna try doing a few more sudden movements so you can see which camera does better. Now the GoPro 8 used to do really good before, so I'm pretty sure the 9 will do just as good or better. So yeah, this is how the image stabilization would work if you're riding the bicycle and you're not going straight basically. So I'll turn left here and I'll keep going and we'll turn left once again. So yeah, 4K 30 frames per second and the boost level of image stabilization. Next we have a quick running test between the GoPro 8 and the 9, and for this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course we have the boost image stabilization available at this resolution. So I'm just gonna keep going this way. We'll keep going. and we're gonna turn left here. There are some steps all the way to the left there, so I'll see if I can actually keep running all the way to those stairs. So yeah, this is how the image stabilization would look like between the 8 and the 9, recording in 4K at 30 frames per second and with the boost image stabilization on. Next we are moving on to another quick test between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9, but for this recording I'm doing 1080p at 120 frames per second. So at this resolution both cameras have the boost level of image stabilization. So that is basically the maximum level of image stabilization. So I guess I'm gonna run for a bit just so you can see how the image stabilization does at that resolution. So yeah, this is how recording in 1080p at 120 frames per second would look like between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. Alright, and I am back. So for image stabilization, I did notice a bit of a difference, mostly when you're walking slow and when you're swinging the camera something like this. So the GoPro 9 does seem to do better in those situations. Now, the GoPro 8 was the best camera for image stabilization before the 9, and that's still a thing today. And I mean, this camera is pretty amazing for image stabilization. If you're on a bicycle, for example, it looks like you are flying almost. So the image stabilization is really good on both, but the 9 does improve the image stabilization when walking or doing some other more awkward movements, I would say. So yes, the GoPro 9 does seem to have a bit better image stabilization. Next we're gonna check out a few sample recordings so we can see which camera has better video quality. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back. We are moving on to another quick walking test between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. Now for this recording I'm doing 4K at 60 frames per second, and at this resolution the GoPro 9 still has the boost image stabilization, where the GoPro 8 is using the Hyper Smooth 2.0. So you may see a difference here when I'm walking. As you can probably see for yourself, I am walking. So this is how recording in 4K at 60 frames per second would look like under these conditions. And we are moving on to another quick recording, but this time around I'm recording in 4K at 60 frames per second. As I may have mentioned earlier, at 4K at 60 frames per second the GoPro 9 has the maximum level of image stabilization available, which is called Boost, but the GoPro 8 only gets Hyper Smooth 2.0. So we're gonna stop here, we're gonna pan up slowly and we'll go left. We'll walk this way for a bit. So this is how recording in 4K at 60 frames per second would look like between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. And just before we move to a different location, I wanted to show you how a 5K at 30 frames per second recording looks on the GoPro 9, and how a 4K at 30 frames per second recording looks on the GoPro 8. So we're gonna pan left here and we'll pan right now towards the sun. Basically, I'm not sure if we can see anything on the cameras. I definitely cannot see anything on the screens, but we'll walk this way. So yeah, this is how recording in 5K at 30 frames per second would look like from the GoPro 9, and the same recording in 4K at 30 frames per second from the GoPro 8. Alright, and we are moving on to another quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between the GoPro 9 and the GoPro 8. So at 4K at 30 frames per second, as I mentioned earlier, we have the maximum level of image stabilization, which is Boost. Now here there is a bit more noise around me, you can probably hear that water, there is a bit of wind and some traffic. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between these two cameras would look like under these conditions. We are moving on to another quick recording between the GoPro Hero 8 Black and the GoPro Hero 9 Black. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can probably see for yourself, I am walking fairly slow. So we're gonna stop somewhere around here, we'll pan left towards the water, so it is brighter that way, and then we'll pan back right and we'll walk this way. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second would look like with these two action cameras. Alright, so for video quality, not a lot has changed, but personally I think I prefer the recordings from the GoPro 9. So they finally turned down that crazy contrast that we have on the GoPro 8. So the contrast is a bit lower from the recordings from the 9. And the colors do seem a bit less saturated. So they do look a bit closer to reality. And the dynamic range seems to be improved from the recordings done by the GoPro 9. Now, there isn't that much of a difference. I mean, maybe when you're recording in 5K, you can probably tell that the footage is a bit sharper, but only slightly. So there is a small improvement for the 9, but it's gonna be hard to justify upgrading from the 8 to the 9 for that improvement. At least in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Is there a big difference between the 8 and the 9? Next I want to show you a couple of recordings that I've done in low light, and I have to say that I was kind of disappointed by the 9 and the recordings that I've done in low light. So let's check out those nighttime recordings and I will be right back. Alright, and we're moving on to a quick recording in low light between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and the image stabilization is set to boost on both devices. So we're gonna stop here, we'll pan left slowly. And then we'll go this way. It gets a bit darker if we turn right somewhere around here. So we can see which camera does better in a darker environment basically. And I can't really see anything on either camera. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9 would look like under these conditions. And we're moving on to our second recording in low light between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. For this recording I am recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second, and of course at this resolution both devices have the boost image stabilization available. So we'll pan up, down, and I guess we'll walk this way for a bit. So yeah, this is how recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second would look like between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 9. So as you've seen for yourself, the nighttime recordings from the GoPro 9 do seem to have a bit less noise than the recordings that we got from the GoPro 8, but at the same time the recordings from the 9 are also darker, so I'm assuming that that's why they have less noise, because the ISO is lower. But I would say that both cameras are pretty much unusable for nighttime recordings because the recordings are just too dark. So I was actually expecting way more from the GoPro 9 because, well, it is an expensive camera after all. So for nighttime recordings, they are still unusable. As for pictures, well, there isn't that much of a difference. I was actually hoping there would be a bigger difference between the pictures that I took with the 9 and the 8, but no, the pictures do look fairly similar. I guess the pictures from the 9 are a bit brighter and maybe a bit sharper, but you can't really tell that big of a difference in between the two. As for nighttime pictures, you're probably better off not to take any pictures with the 9 or with the 8 because the pictures just don't look good, and most cell phones these days would do much better for nighttime pictures. So is it worth upgrading from the 8 to the 9? Well, in my opinion, it's not. And even if you have the 7, I personally kind of like the 7 more than the 8. So I would say that if you have the GoPro 7 and the GoPro 8, is not necessarily worth upgrading to the 9. I mean, sure, we have a screen on the front here and a somewhat larger screen on the back. But there isn't that much of a difference between these two cameras. But what do you guys think? Do you like this one more over this one, or would you rather spend less and get the 8 over the 9? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, don't forget to press that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.